what Israel's doing right now is destroying support for Israel around the world. There was, until roughly October 7th, a lot of support for Israel, largely thanks to a lot of propaganda, a lot of efforts, a lot of money spent on that propaganda to make people think that Israel is, the only functioning democracy in the Middle East. Well, it's funny when you take all the people you disagree with and you put them in a prison and you say they can't vote. Boy, democracy works a lot easier that way, doesn't it? So much easier. Kind of like when black people couldn't vote in the United States or when women couldn't vote in the United States. Anyway, thanks to a lot of propaganda, they had a lot of support, but a lot of support was amongst kind of low information people, which unfortunately a lot of this world is low information people. It's just, it's multiple reasons. Some because people are being propagandized too. Some because people work their asses off by design, and the system makes it so they don't have any time. You got 3 jobs and kids screaming at you, and you're like, let me sit down and read this extensive article on the reality of Israel when I don't even live there. Very few people doing that. So they had a lot of support amongst low information people and others, but I'd say that was a big chunk of it. And that support for Israel is collapsing. And they are doing this to themselves by perpetrating genocide. So this is from Time Magazine, which is, a liberal outlet. They do not do very much impressive coverage, but that doesn't change the fact that sometimes the truth is the truth, and they still got to report it. So there's a new polling. New polling has come out. Thousands upon thousands around the globe were polled. And it shows just how much global support Israel has lost. New data, as well as I'll also get to how much it's impacting the U.S., support for the U.S. as well. New data shared with Time from the business intelligence company Morning Consult shows that support for Israel around the world has dropped significantly since the war in Gaza began. Net favorability, the percentage of people viewing Israel positively versus negatively, net favorability dropped globally by an average of over 18 percentage points, which is a major shift in support. That is humongous for 100 days to have over 18% of the global population completely shift their view of your country. 18 percentage points between September and December, decreasing in 42 out of 43 countries polled. 42 out of 43 countries, net favorability for Israel has decreased. I don't actually know which one it has not decreased, unless Israel's the answer, because I think even the U.S. has slightly decreased. But anyway, China, South Africa, Brazil, and several other countries in Latin America all went from viewing Israel positively to negatively. And many rich countries that had already had net negative views of Israel, including Japan, South Korea, and the UK, saw steep declines. Net favorability in Japan went from negative 40%, Jesus, to negative 62%. In Japan. In South Korea, it went from negative 5 to negative 48. Net favorability is negative 48. And in the UK, it went from negative 17 to almost negative 30%. The war began on October. Oh, and so then the Time magazine gets into a slight bit of propaganda here, just by the way they phrase this. They say, the war, first of all, right now it's not a war, it's a genocide. You can't have two sides matched this aggressively, unequally, and just call it a war. But anyway, the war began on October 7th when Hamas, now pay attention to the wording here, Hamas, and the reason I'm spending any time on this is because this can be, you can use this when you're listening to other reports, this way they manipulate the terminology. When Hamas massacred some 1,200 Israelis. Okay, first of all, using the term massacre, now that would be fine if they used that term for all people killed on either side, but you'll see they don't. Massacre is specifically reserved, apparently, for the behavior of Hamas in this situation. Only Hamas is capable of massacring all other campaigns or conflicts or things the US or Israel or others do, that is not a massacre. Only Hamas can massacre. But they say Hamas massacred 1,200 Israelis. We now know that if you subtract from that 1,200 IDF, because this is, you're calling it a war, you wouldn't say that you wouldn't act like that's innocent civilians. If you subtract from that IDF, and then you subtract from that the people the IDF killed, which is a lot, then the actual number that Hamas killed that were not either soldiers, police, or were killed by IDF, you get down to a tiny number. We'll never know what that number is because there's too much has been covered up. Anyway, I'm going to get more into that in a moment. But Hamas massacred 1,200 Israelis, took 240 hostage. Israel's retaliation has resulted, key passive voice, it's just resulted. It's just a result. It's not done by anyone, right? No one actively killed someone. It's just resulted. How about, here's another way to, well, let me finish the sentence. Israel's retaliation has resulted in the reported, let's separate ourselves another step. It's been reported, we don't know, but it's been reported, resulted in the reported deaths of at least 24,000 Palestinians. Now, imagine if you rephrase this sentence in the reverse way, as in Hamas's retaliation for being imprisoned in the open-air prison of Gaza resulted in 1,200 Israeli deaths. So Hamas's retaliation resulted in, resulted in a reported 1,200 Israeli deaths. Israel has massacred 24,000 Palestinians. You see, you can reverse the terminology, and all of a sudden, it sounds very different, doesn't it? Sounds like almost a completely different situation with that terminology reversed. Last week, the International Criminal Court took up South Africa's case on genocidal acts. The U.S. remains the only rich country that still had net positive views of Israel. So we still have net positive views, but we did have a decrease, which I think they said, anyway, doesn't matter. Not worth it. The U.S. remains the only rich country that still had net positive views of Israel. Net favorability dropped 2.2 percentage points. I can't believe it's that low. From a net favorability of 18.2 to a net favorability of 16 from September to December. Now, I will say that there is one thing that can impact, or at least one thing I can think of that can impact this poll, is these are opt-in people so they get a phone call, random phone call or something, and they're asked if they're willing to give their views on Israel. Now, in countries where the view of Israel is negative, people who are upset about what Israel is doing are probably very likely to say, yes, I want to answer that poll because I'm angry at Israel. I want to answer that poll. Yeah, they suck. Whereas in the United States, since there's a net favorability here for Israel, it's quite possible that people are more likely to answer the poll if they favor Israel. So you could have a kind of, it's a bit of a push where these numbers are slightly off on both directions. But the idea that it has only gone down 2% in the United States seems wrong to me. I mean, in person, I have trouble finding anyone that fully supports this genocide. It's incredibly rare. Anyway, in Egypt, so then they talk about the U.S. favorability. In Egypt, the U.S. went from having a positive favorability of 41% to a negative of negative 15%. So Israel's genocide, which is U.S. backed, and many of the bombs being dropped are U.S. bombs, and many of the funds being used to obliterate Gaza are U.S. funds, and the U.S. has special operations in Israel helping them with various aspects of the genocide. And the U.S. is also piloting apparently some surveillance drones across Gaza to help Israel perpetrate this genocide. And the U.S. is also helping them against other countries like Lebanon, etc. And attacking Syria and Iraq and dealing with attacking Yemen, and so the U.S. is very much involved in this genocide. But it's still surprising that the U.S. favorability in Egypt has gone from 41% positive to negative 15. That's impressive. In Saudi Arabia, the U.S. saw a similar trend, dropping from positive favorability of 12.2% to negative 10.5% over the same period. Anyway, all of this is to say, point being, all this is to say that this genocide is killing support for Israel. It's killing whatever remaining support for the U.S. empire there was. And that is why you see a lot of justification that this could result in a global revolution of varying stripes, maybe just an ideological one, maybe something more. But these type of things are this type of net change in the global view of something should not be ignored. It is important